Hey guys, welcome back. Today in this video, I am going to teach you guys all about multiplying binomials. So get out a piece of paper if you want to follow along and write a few of these examples down with me. So before we start jumping into the math, it's probably pretty important to understand what a binomial even is. You may have never heard that word before. But what you may have heard me talk about before is a polynomial. And they're very similar. So let me just write down and get these down and kind of straighten it out in our heads like which one is which. So a polynomial is an expression with many terms. So that just means one or more. And what I mean by terms is something like this: x squared plus 2x plus 3. None of these can be combined together because none of them are like terms. So I have 3 terms in this. That would be considered a polynomial. But another type of polynomial would just be if I had something like just the first term, x squared. That's also a polynomial. And another example of a polynomial might just be something like 3x squared plus 2. In this example, there are 2 terms. So a polynomial is just any expression with many terms. In fact, this prefix right here, this is kind of a quick little English lesson. Poly, that means many. So if you remember that, it's pretty easy to remember what the definition is. Okay, so binomial, again, if we look at that prefix bi, that means 2. So a binomial is a polynomial with 2 terms. In fact, this example I just did over here is specifically an example of a binomial. So polynomial is just a general term that covers everything, and binomial is a specific example of a polynomial where there's exactly 2. Okay, you can probably see where this is going. That prefix right there, tri, means 3. And so a trinomial is a polynomial with 3 terms. So that might be something that looks like this, where there's specifically 3 terms. I will say something that sometimes is a common misconception is if I were to write something like this and tell you that that's a trinomial, some kids might get confused because it looks like there's 4 terms. So how is that a trinomial? Well, the reason is because these 2 right here can be combined. They are like terms. 5x and 2x, you can just add those together and say 7x. And so when it is in simplified form, there are only 3 terms. None of the other ones can be combined. So what you need to get from this page is that polynomial is just the general term for any expression that has 1 or more terms. Binomial is when there's exactly 2, and trinomial is when there's exactly 3. Alright, so let's move on to actually multiplying these together. So before we start on these examples, let me remind you of something that looks like this. If I were to show you guys a problem like this, all of you would know what to do already. And that is that we would distribute. We would multiply the 3 to both terms on the inside of the parentheses. And what would we get when we do that? 3 times x would give us 3x, and 3 times 2 would give us 6. And that would be my final answer. So what we're going to do with multiplying binomials is that exact same idea. It's just that instead of having one thing out in front, you have 2 things out in front. And so all I'm doing is just distributing. I'm going to take the x and multiply it to both things in the second parentheses. Then I'm going to take the positive 2 and multiply that to both things in the second set of parentheses. So let's do the blue one first. Let's multiply x to both things in the second parentheses. And what do I get when I do that? Well, x times x is x squared, and x times 5 is 5x. So I did the first one. Now let's do the second one. Let's take the positive 2 and multiply that to both things. So what do I get? 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times 5 is 10. And I'm almost done here, but just like I showed you before, if you can combine any of your like terms together, you definitely should. And I can put these 2 together. They're the only ones in here that are like terms, and that gives me 7x. So as my final answer, I'll bring down the rest of the problem. X squared plus 7x plus 10. That is my final answer. And that is a trinomial. Alright, I'm going to erase the screen and do the second example. If you need to pause it here so you can write it down, go ahead and do that now. All right, so let's do the second example. First, I'm going to take the x and multiply it to both things in the second parentheses. So what would I get with that? Well, x times x is x squared, and x times 8 is 8x. Okay, so I'm done with that one. And now let's take, this is a negative 3, so just be careful with your sign. Take the negative 3 and multiply that to both things. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x. And negative 3 times 8 is negative 24. And just like the last one, I'm going to put together anything that I can put together, and these two are like terms. 8x minus 3x gives us 5x. And then I'll just bring down the rest of the things in my problem that could not combine. And that's my final answer. So multiplying binomials is the exact same thing as a distributive property. It's just that you have to do it twice since there are two terms out in front instead of one. I'm going to move on at this point, so if you need to pause the screen and look at the work, go ahead and do that now. All right, let's do a few more examples, and then I'll pause it and have you guys do some of these on your own. I'm actually going to jump over to number 3, this one over here. I want to show you what it looks like if you have numbers, coefficients in front of the x instead of just plain x's. So let's first start with taking the first term and multiplying it to the second 2 in the second parentheses. So same exact start as last time. So let's see, what is that? 2x times 3x. Well, the 2 times 3 gives us 6, and the x times x gives us x squared. So that gives me 6x squared. 2x times 5, actually, notice that that's a negative 5, so that'd be a negative 10x. And then I'm done with the first part. Now I'll take the positive 1, the second piece, and distribute that to both. So 1 times 3x, the first one, is just going to be a positive 3x. And 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. Okay, and now I'm going to combine together anything I can combine together, which would just be these middle terms right here. Negative 10x and positive 3 is negative 7x. And then I'll just write the rest of the problem down. So I had 6x squared here. This term over here was a negative 5, even though it's crammed in there. And that's my final answer. So there's absolutely nothing different if you have coefficients in front, like these examples. It's just that you have to multiply those numbers as well. Okay, I'll clear the screen in a second, but before I do that, I want to show you question 5 down here. How do we do that? And what even is that? And I'm going to do that and then have you guys do some on your own. So what is x plus 4 squared? Well, remember that squared, this exponent here, means that you multiply it by itself. So before I even do the problem, it would probably be a lot easier if I wrote it like this. X plus 4 times x plus 4. That's what that means to be x plus 4 squared. And then it's a lot easier if you're viewing it like this because you actually have things that you can draw arrows to help your mind visualize it. So now we'll distribute it out in the exact same way that we did before. Take the x, send it to both. X times x gives us x squared. X times 4 gives us 4x. And now I'm done with the first term, and now I'll do the same thing with the second term. Positive 4 times x is 4x, and positive 4 times positive 4 is 16. Combining together anything I can combine together would be these middle two. 4 plus 4 gives me 8, so 8x. And then just drop down all the other terms from my problem. And that's my final answer, x squared plus 8x plus 16. So anytime your problem starts like this, where it's something squared, just write that out twice like we did here and draw your arrows in. All right, pause the screen if you need to look at it. I'm going to clear it off now and have you guys do a few of these on your own. And I'll tell you exactly which ones I want you to do. How about we do number 1, number 2, and number 6 on our own. So pause the screen here, work these out on a piece of paper, and hit play when you're ready to check your answers. All right, so check your answers with mine. I do want to point one thing out. On this first one, when you did x times 1, some of you might have wrote that as 1x, and that's totally fine. But remember that that's just the exact same thing as plain old x, which is why I wrote it like that right here. And that does combine together with 4x to give me my final answer for the middle term of 5x. And remember for the last one, instead of keeping it as y minus 7 squared, I wrote that out twice, and then I could draw my arrows from each term to the second parentheses to help me see it clearer. Pause your screen here if you need to check these over, and we will do this one down here together before we move on to the next slide after. All right, so let's do one more together. I am going to take my first term, which is x, and multiply it to both of these things, which gives me x squared minus 6x, because that's a negative 6 right there. And now I'm done with the first term, so now let's do the second term, which was negative 3. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x, and negative 3 times negative 6, remember a negative times a negative is a positive. All right, and what can I combine together here? Negative 6x and negative 3x can combine together to give me negative 9x. And so here's my final answer, and that's a trinomial. All right, pause the screen if you need to look at that, and let's keep moving. So the last example we're going to do today is how does it work if you're doing a binomial, which has 2 terms, and you're multiplying it to a trinomial, which has 3 terms. And the answer is you just do the exact same thing. We're just going to distribute. So I'm going to take the first term and multiply it to all 3, write all that down, then take the second term and multiply that to all 3. So it's the exact same thing. You just have an extra term, and you have to do it to 3 things instead of 2 things, but it's the exact same steps. Let's do the first one together, and then I'll have you guys pause it and try the second one on your own and check your answer. So doing the first one, I'm going to take x and multiply it to all 3 of these things. So first up is x times x squared. Well, that would be x cubed. Remember, I add the exponents. When you multiply, let me actually write that out. In my head, this is what I'm thinking. When I do x times x squared, this technically has an exponent of 1. And when you have the same bases, remember you add the exponents. That's from last week's stuff. So that's how I knew that the first term, x times x squared, when I send this, is going to be x cubed. Okay, next one, let's do x times 3x. So think in your head you should be doing, and actually that's a negative 3x. So in my head, I need to think about how I'm going to do this. Well, the number is going to be negative 3 because 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. And then x times x, remember that's x to the first power times x to the first power. Add those exponents and you get x squared. So my final answer for that second part, doing x times negative 3x, is negative 3x squared. All right, and then last one, I need to do x times negative 2. That gives me negative 2x. I should write that in the same color probably. Okay, and let's do that one more time, this time with the positive 5. So take the positive 5 and multiply it to everything. First up, 5 times x squared gives me 5x squared. Next up, 5 times negative 3x is negative, not negative 3. 5 times negative 3 gives me negative 15, but there was an x in there. And last one was doing positive 5 times negative 2, which is negative 10. All right, now I need to combine some things together, and I like to circle things that can be combined and maybe square things that can be combined. So let's look at the term that has an x squared. Is there anything else that has an x squared? Yes, that would be right over here. And I always box in, I include the sign right here to help me know if it's positive or negative. So let's put those together. Negative 3x squared and positive 5x squared would combine together to give me a positive 2x squared. I'm going to write that down. I know there's going to be other things that I join with it, but I'll write that down for now. One easy one that I could look at even just right now is, does x cubed have any other cubes that I could combine it with? Here there's not a cube, here there's not a cube, and here there's not a cube. So that x cubed is kind of just something by itself, so I don't have to combine that with anything, and I can already write that down to my final answer. And it looks like the only other thing that can be combined is this negative 2x and the negative 15x. That would combine together to give me negative 17x. And lastly is I had this regular number down here, and there's no other regular number, so that cannot combine together. So I have an x cubed term, I have an x squared term, an x term, and then a regular number. So this is a polynomial with 4 terms, ends up being my final answer. Okay, if you need to pause it to look it over, go ahead and do that now, and then I'm going to clear this screen and have you guys do the second one on your own. So pause the screen now, hit play when you're ready to check your answer. All right, before I show you the final answer, this is what I got after distributing. When I took n and multiplied it to all three of these things, here's what I got. And when I took -3 and multiplied it to all three of these things, here's what I got for that. So just check that part. I think places where I could see us going wrong is stuff like a negative times a negative is a positive, and just remembering a few things like that. Once you have that, we can go ahead and combine our like terms. So first let's look at this n cubed. Are there any other cubes? Not here, not here, not here, not here, not here. So there's nothing else that has an n cubed. So I cannot combine this with anything else. So I'll start writing that in my final answer. Okay, next up, I have an n squared. Is there any other n squared term? Yes, right over here. So I have -2 on this side, -2n squared, and -3n squared over here. That will combine together to give me -5n squared. Next up, I have +4n and +6n. If you add those up, you get +10n. And then I have this -12 over here that has no other regular number to combine with, so that just will stay put and not be combined with anything, and we are all set. Okay, so the main things that you needed to get from this is this slide right here, multiplying a binomial by a trinomial. It's just distributing. And then this page over here where we multiply together two binomials. The rest of it was just vocabulary that we'll kind of use throughout. And that is it for today. If you understand all that, then you guys are good to go. Remember that during office hours, feel free to always reach out to me with emails or anything, and I'll be happy to help you. Have a good day, you guys.